From Mount Everest being the tallest mountain in the world, to Hawaii being part of North America, to New York being the biggest city in the US, these are all totally incorrect US geography facts that everyone still believes, including you. For example, you probably believe that the Statue of Liberty geographically belongs to New York City, but this is wrong. Now, I'm not gonna go so far as to say that Liberty Island isn't part of New York City. I know New Yorkers will greet me with baseball bats next time I go there, but I'll say that Liberty Island is closer to New Jersey than it is to New York City. Also, Liberty Island is in New Jersey's territorial waters. So, geographically, it's in New Jersey, but politically, it's in New York City. So, that explains why New Yorkers hate New Jersey. And since we're talking about Lady Liberty, most people know that the French gave the statue as a gift to the US for the 100th anniversary of American independence. But it was actually intended for Egypt in the late 1860s. That's right, it was intended to mark the Suez Canal, but the French changed their mind. They sent it to the Americans as a symbol of Franco-American friendship. It was designed by Frederick Auguste Bartholdi, while Gustave Eiffel, the man who designed the Eiffel Tower, designed its internal iron framework. The Liberty enlightening the world has since marked the friendship between the two nations, and the French made sure to call in their favors during World War II. Maybe Kansas should do something similar for Missouri to get its town back? You would assume that Kansas City, named after the proud state of Kansas, would belong only to Kansas State. But guess again. Kansas City is actually split down the middle, and the other half belongs to Missouri. In fact, the Chiefs Stadium is even on the Missouri side. This means that both Kansas and Missouri have their own version of Kansas City. I wonder if the Missouri side ever thought of naming it Missouri City, but did you know that Missouri is a victim of another geographical myth? Yes, because it's so popular, most people think that the Mississippi River is the longest in the US. But it's not. Missouri is the longest river in the US. That being said, it's not a large difference. The Mississippi River is 2,340 miles long, while the Missouri River is only 1 mile longer at 2,341. That goes to show every inch counts. If you know, you know. However, even though the Mississippi is shorter, it travels through 10 states, while the Missouri travels through only 7. And speaking of traveling, you might think that you need to travel north to reach Canada from the US. And for the most part, you'd be right, but there are a few exceptions. Of course, the first and a rather obvious one has to be Alaska. From Alaska, you travel east to reach the Great White North. But that's not all. If you live in Detroit and you want to go to the city of Windsor, right across the Detroit River, you need to travel south because the Detroit River flows in a curve. It causes the Canadian city of Windsor to curve southwest, and because it's opposite Detroit, it means you travel south to reach Canada. That's right, the Great White North is actually south, which brings us to another US state misconception: Maine. Ask any American, and they'll tell you that Maine is the easternmost state in the US, but it's actually Alaska. If you think I got east and west all mixed up, I didn't. This is a geographical technicality. You see, the Aleutian Islands are a chain of volcanic islands that are so long they span past the 180th meridian. If you want to get specific, the Semisopochnoi Island is actually in the easternmost part of the US, and you thought going south to Canada would be weird. And you know what else is weird? Arkansas pronunciation. This is something a lot of foreigners get wrong, because Arkansas seems like a phonetic twin of Kansas, but most tourists pronounce it as Arkansas. But that's absolutely wrong, and you might be insulting the indigenous people. The legally correct pronunciation is Arkansas, and the name is derived from the Native American tribe located in the region, the Quapaw people. Kansas is named after the Kansa tribe that lived there, so even though they look similar, they sound completely different. Getting the pronunciation right isn't about being a know-it-all, although some people strive for it and are a gigantic pain in the rear. It's really about paying respect for the state's Native American roots, and there's a similar Native American misconception about New Mexico. People who've never been to New Mexico think this is just Mexico 2.0. That's because the name throws them off, and they think New Mexico is influenced primarily by its southern neighbor because of the chili peppers, adobe houses, and sombreros. However, New Mexico is culturally different from Mexico. In fact, the Navajo, Apache, and Pueblo people have left their deep mark on New Mexican culture. In fact, New Mexico's been influenced by a blend of cultures, from Native American to African American, and yes, even Mexican influence. But it's not as if Mexico reincarnated itself in the States. So, while we're near the US's southern neighbor, let's talk about how Mexico is completely upside down. Literally. The reason is simple. Some Mexicans have to travel south to get to Texas. So whoever said that Mexico is south of the United States must not have been from Florida or Texas, because people from Texas know that Mexico's northernmost parts are so far north, they would have to travel south to get to Texas or Florida. Talk about a weird trip, going south to Texas from Mexico? And since we're talking about things that are south, there's always Florida. If you looked at a map of the US, you'd notice that Key West is the southernmost point in the country. But that's only half the truth. That's because Florida is the southernmost state of the 48 contiguous US states. But when you consider Hawaii, that fact immediately becomes false. Hawaii, specifically Kauai, is 1,000 miles further south. And what if I told you that even that's false? Remember, the US has overseas territories, and Rose Atoll in American Samoa is the southernmost part of the US. I lost $10 in a bet due to a technicality on this. So, the more you know, and since we're already in the Pacific, here's a crazy misconception about Hawaii. Most would say that Hawaii is part of North America. After all, it's one of the 50 US states, right? Well, Hawaii isn't actually part of North America. Sure, it's part of the US, but geographically, Hawaii belongs to the Polynesian sub-region. It's part of the broader Oceania region, which also includes Australia, Melanesia, Micronesia, and New Zealand. Wonder if Australia is plotting to overtake this island someday? After all, it does have some neat perks like having the tallest mountain in the world. Yep, you heard that correctly, and here you thought Mount Everest was the tallest mountain in the world. But here's the thing. Hawaii's Mauna Kea is actually taller than Mount Everest, if measured from the base. While Mount Everest reaches a dizzying height of 8,839 meters above sea level to peak, Mauna Kea is 10,210 meters from base to peak. That being said, 6,004 meters of that height is below the sea, and only 4,206 meters is above ground. Now, that's what you call a hidden treasure. And from the tallest mountain, we move to the largest state. Texans are proud of the size of Texas, but that got taken away from them when Alaska entered the scene. Even though it doesn't look like it on the map, Alaska is more than twice the land area of Texas. The Lone Star State covers an area of 268,596 square miles, while Alaska doubles that and leaves something for the next person with a size of 665,384 square miles. So I guess everything is not bigger in Texas, and LA will get the same ego check, but for being the westernmost city. If you ask an American to tell you what the westernmost major city in the US is, they'll probably say it's LA, but that's not at all true. Thanks to movies and TV shows, we've grown to know California and Hollywood in Los Angeles as the westernmost city. But it's actually Portland, Oregon that holds this title. Portland is farther west than LA, San Francisco, Seattle, and San Diego. Basically, Portland is the king of the West, and Alaska is the king of borders. Hey, yeah, you. Hit that subscribe button before the algorithm forgets we even met. Done? Great, let's continue. If you compared Alaska to the contiguous United States, you'd say that the US is a longer border. But don't bet your house on that. The Alaskan border is longer than that of the US. The last frontier has 6,640 miles of coast, but if you count all the inlets and bays, that number is much greater. The 48 states have 19,500 miles of border, 7,590 miles of which are with Canada, and 1,954 miles are with Mexico. Meanwhile, Alaska has 33,000 miles of border. I told you Alaska is the undisputed king of borders. At the same time, California's and Canada's borders are really close. Some might even say that California and Canada's borders could theoretically meet. That's because Canada's Point Pelee National Park near Detroit sits at 41.95 degrees north. while California's northern border reaches 42 degrees latitude. So if you could somehow move these 2 points closer together, they would actually meet. So does this mean Canada is as hot as California? Or is California as cold as Canada? Whatever the case, Alaska isn't as cold as you've been led to believe. The last frontier isn't just snow and polar bears. It's one of the most diverse states in the US. First off, it has active volcanoes, 130 volcanoes with 50 being active in the last 300 years. And while it might sound strange, Alaska is home to a rainforest, the Tongass National Forest. Plus, the average temperature in the summer is 80 degrees Fahrenheit. It's basically like Texas, but with glaciers. And just as Alaska was shaped by glaciers, so was the Hudson, which flows both ways. Most people would say that the Hudson River flows north, but that's where things get tricky. You see, the Hudson River, which stretches for 315 miles from the Adirondack Mountains to the Atlantic Ocean, flows both ways. That's because it's a tidal estuary. That complex term simply means that the ocean's tides push salt water upriver and then pull it back out to the sea. And since we're on the subject of river flow, let me ask you something. Would you say that all major American rivers flow south? Well, that might be true for rivers like the Mississippi and Columbia rivers, but it's not true for all of them. In fact, the flow of the river has nothing to do with north or south and everything to do with the river basin. Basically, rivers flow downhill, and that's why the St. Johns River in Florida and the Red River actually flow north. So north can sometimes mean down. And on that same note, some Americans need to travel south to get to Europe. Let's say you're getting on a flight to London from JFK Airport in New York City. Would you need to travel east to get there? Most people would say yes, because in our mental maps, Europe is east of the US. While that's somewhat correct, you'd have to travel northeast to get to London. In fact, the entire city of London is sitting farther north than the entire contiguous United States. And for some reason, it's still not colder than Minnesota. But there's another deceiving mental map. The one I'm talking about is between the US and Africa. That's because most people assume that Florida is closest to Africa. But in reality, it's Maine. That's right, because the East Coast in the United States slopes northeast. Maine is only 3,154 miles away from El Beduza, Morocco. Meanwhile, Florida's closest African point is Guerguerat in Western Sahara, with 4,085 miles. I wonder if Maine has direct flights to Africa. They'd kill the competition, kind of like the Grand Canyon's popularity killed Hell's Canyon's popularity. Because it's the biggest and most awe-inspiring canyon in the US, most people also assume it's the deepest. But that title goes to Hell's Canyon right on the Oregon-Idaho border. The canyon was carved by the ancient Snake River and is 8,000 feet deep, which is about 2,000 feet deeper than the Grand Canyon, and relatively speaking, Hell's Canyon is only 2.1 million years old, while the Grand Canyon was formed at least 6 million years ago. And while Snake River carved Hell's Canyon, Central Park was carved by human hands, not by nature. Central Park might be the most famous city park in the world, but it's not natural. Not one tree, stone, or pond was made by nature. It's built entirely by human hands. Two men, Frederick Law Olmsted and Calvert Vaux, designed every inch of that park. And to do it, they displaced the community of free black landowners formerly known as Seneca Village. Guess they needed the greenery more than they needed the people. Sad. And just as the park is no longer owned by the original people, the Great Lakes aren't owned only by America. Did you know that the 5 Great Lakes are not owned by the US alone? Because it's actually true. Only Lake Michigan is entirely within the United States. Meanwhile, the water of Lake Superior, Lake Huron, Lake Erie, and Lake Ontario is shared between the US and Canada, because they're right on the border. I wonder if using the water from these lakes is worth dealing with all those international agreements. They're not so great now, are they? But the US shouldn't worry. They should have a new Great Lake where Houston used to be. That's because Houston is not a stable city. It's sinking into the ground. Every year, Texas' largest city is sinking into the ground by 2 inches because the city is growing so fast. Underground water from aquifers has been pumped out, and the soil is slowly compacting. Some neighborhoods are sinking only 0.8 inches annually, while others sink 2 inches per year. So the phrase, "Houston, we have a problem," took on a whole new meaning. However, Houston isn't the only thing that's big in Texas. If I showed you a picture of Rhode Island and King Ranch in Texas, which would you say is bigger? Well, any normal and sane person would say that an entire US state is surely bigger. But they'd be wrong. Rhode Island has a land area of 668,000 acres and a population of 1.1 million people. King Ranch, on the other hand, covers 825,000 acres of land. The majority of the ranch was bought in 1853 by Richard King. 50 years earlier, maybe King would have bought Louisiana from the French, but that's nothing compared to how big the Great Lakes are. The name Great Lakes suggests that these bodies of water are slightly bigger than your out-of-town fishing hole, but that couldn't be further from the truth. The Great Lakes could be considered inland seas because of their vast area. They create their own weather patterns and snowstorms. In fact, Lake Superior, with its 31,700 square miles, could swallow West Virginia and still have room for dessert. Did someone say desert? No? Let's talk about it anyway. What if I told you that the US has cold deserts as well? No, not desserts like chocolate cake, but cold deserts, like the Great Basin Desert. Incidentally, this is one of the coldest deserts in the US. It's just sagebrush and ice during the wintertime, and if you're thinking that a desert cannot be cold, it can be. That's because a desert is an area with a lack of precipitation, and the Great Basin lacks exactly that. But something the USA doesn't lack is oceans. Would you be surprised if I said that the US is surrounded by 3 oceans? And no, I'm not going to invent an ocean just to prove a point. There's the Atlantic and Pacific, of course, but most people tend to forget the Arctic Ocean at the top, the one bordering Alaska. Basically, Alaska is the geography joker. Speaking of which, if you had to name the 4 largest cities in the US, what states would they be in? You might say Texas, because everything is big in Texas. But no, the 4 largest cities in the US are located in Alaska. Juneau, Sitka, Wrangell, and Anchorage are the biggest US cities in terms of land area, but they're not that densely populated. So if you don't want nosy neighbors, you know where to go. Plus, you'd be very close to Hawaii, too. You heard that right. Alaska is actually closer to Hawaii than California. While Hawaii's Maui Island is only 2,286 miles away from Point Arena, California, there are smaller Hawaiian islands that are closer to Alaska. For example, the distance between Amatignak Island in Alaska and Hawaii's Kure Atoll is only 1,573 miles. So, if you live in Alaska, you can go skiing and then take a flight to Hawaii to ride the waves. I know what I'm adding to my bucket list. Speaking of bucket lists, add Montana to it, because it won't be long before they replace Las Vegas. That's because even though Las Vegas is praised as the shiniest, most alluring place for gambling, Montana is a strong second in the number of casinos. While Nevada is home to 345 casinos, Montana is a close second with 171 casinos. So, while the rest of the US states have a couple of dozen, Montana is fighting for the number 1 spot. All they need is a second kind of rock and roll. Maybe that's where the return will be. If corporations don't buy all the land. Some might say that the US is owned by giant corporations, but in reality, it's owned by the government. Actually, 30% of all US land is owned by the federal government through the Bureau of Land Management, the National Park Service, or the Forest Service. Actually, in some states like Nevada, the government owns 80% of the land, and in Utah, it owns 64%. From the 11 western states, the federal government owns 46% of all land. The eastern US gave only 4% to the federal government, so the corporation's myth is actually true here. Maybe that's why Minnesota hid part of itself in Canada? Because not every part of Minnesota is accessible by land. Minnesota's northernmost part, the northwest angle, is cut off by a lake. So if you wanted to get there by land, you'd have to cross the border into Canada, or you could take a boat across the lake. But that's not the best solution when you have to take children to school. Are you gonna put them on a yellow school boat? That's less safe than being in California during an earthquake. Speaking of which, thanks to Hollywood, most people think that California has the most earthquakes. But the medal for most earthquakes goes to Alaska. California experiences 10,000 earthquakes every year, or around 3 per day. Alaska has 20,000 earthquakes per year, or 6 per day. In fact, Alaska experiences 11% of the world's earthquakes, so 1 in every 10 earthquakes in the world happens in Alaska. Maybe The Rock should have called his film Juno instead of San Andreas. Another thing people get wrong about California is the weather. You see, tourists think that California is the Sunshine State, but that's not all true. If you go to the northern parts of California, brace yourself for a lot of fog and cooler temperatures, and the mountainous areas get a lot of snow in the winter. Now, sure, Los Angeles does fit that myth, but not all of California. And don't even get me started on the misconception about Los Angeles winters. Hollywood is mostly at fault for this. They made it seem like there's no such thing as snow in LA. That couldn't be farther from the truth. While LA does experience a lot of sunny days, it does get the occasional snowstorm, the most recent one being in 2023, when a powerful storm swept the US West Coast. In fact, in January and February 1979, a heavy snowstorm caused chaos in Los Angeles, with some areas receiving a foot of snow. So, yeah, don't believe everything Hollywood says. Just as you wouldn't believe everything the media says about NYC. For example, don't believe that Manhattan is simply a natural island. The reality is that while Manhattan did exist naturally, a vast portion of it was artificially built. Some estimates say that between 20 and 29% of the island was built artificially, through landfills and shoreline extensions over centuries. One such example is Battery Park City, which was built on 3 million cubic yards of soil and rock, which was once dug up from the World Trade Center. Similarly, New York State suffers from a different myth. What's the capital of New York? If you said New York City, people from Albany would whip you through the streets. And if you're wondering why the investment capital of the world wouldn't be the state's capital too, then listen to this. Many states didn't want their most populous cities to become the commercial and political power centers of the state. For this same reason, California's capital is Sacramento, and Illinois chose Springfield over Chicago. But we also have a quote-unquote capital problem. The one with our subscriber count. So make sure to subscribe if you enjoyed this video, because it will help us solve that problem. We'll see you in the next one.